Beautiful. Well, let's jump right in and talk with Jane in Minnesota about sex repulsion. Jane, what's going on?
Hi. So I am married. I be in my marriage, but I just really struggle with radical and seemingly causeless shifts from being open to sex and comfortable with, everything from sex to nudity, just subtleties of sex repulse.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I'm so sorry, Jane. That was a small mistake on my part. Can you repeat that last bit?
Yeah, so going from just like seemingly causeless shift from being comfortable with sex to being extremely sex repulsed, and same thing with nudity, and I
Hmm.
mean every aspect of sexuality, just absolutely like I can't not make a face. And so it's a real problem. I don't want to be that way, but I've even wondered at times, because it can last for like months, if I'm asexual, which was terrifying, of course, when I was first thinking about that, because I am married. Um, but then I will snap out of it at times and it'll be fine. I'll be comfortable. And then it just will switch again. And I was raised very, very strict evangelical, right in the middle of the purity movement. I feel it's important to mention that.
Hmm.
And a lot of my first sexual experiences and even just with male nudity were unfortunately very influenced, connected to my father, who is my abuser in my life. He was horrible, but
Hmm.
this was not in a rape context. I want to make that clear. It wasn't rape,
Sure.
but it was just very, very unfortunate that that was kind of how that happened in my life. So I think that could have something to do with it as well.
Sure.
Um, and I'm just not sure how to heal, how much of this is natural for me with my personality. Am I like gray sexual? Is this normal for me to go through shifts? Um, or am I just so damaged? Yes.
Yeah.
Even though I've really tried, like I do belly dance. I used to take pole classes. Like I've started watching porn a little bit, trying to get comfortable. I mean, stuff that I would be terrified or just horrified that, I'm even going there. And
Hmm.
I'm actually going to start a job at a sex adult shop that is a really wonderful chain, very, very healthy, like classy place. I'm very excited to work there, but I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, I feel like it's part of my story that I need to do this to come
Mm-hmm.
360, but I'm kind of like, is this going to make it better or worse to be working with these things, seeing these images? Maybe it'll help. Maybe it'll. So I just really, really was wondering, Christy, I know you're a therapist and you deal with this. And I've just for weeks, I've been wanting to ask you this question. I just wondered, all of you, what you'd say, how I could heal or find out, what's normal and be a fully functioning adult
Yeah.
person.
No, I so appreciate that you are taking this part of yourself seriously, and it sounds like you're putting like meaningful thought and effort into it and really challenging yourself to maybe push against some of that discomfort, which we know that that type of exposure can be really really useful in in healing and becoming more comfortable as we normalize these things. But as you were
Mhm.
speaking, the thing that maybe stood out to me or had me potentially concerned was whether you might be pushing yourself too far, stretching yourself until things start to like really, really hurt. And I think the most important advice is that you would be tuned into and listening to your body. That doesn't necessarily mean that you obey your body, because if something makes you a little uncomfortable, it's probably a good idea to do that like yoga stretch that you're doing. But if it's starting to feel like it's really hurting, that's not good yoga. That's overextending. That could be really damaging. How do those ideas resonate with your experience?
Well, I mean, I was kind of wondering if you might have that feedback. I have been really careful about not trying, trying not to just force it, all the
Mm,
time and just giving myself space. But Uh, so with the interesting thing with porn is, from what I have seen, it's actually raised my opinion of human bodies, as opposed to being like, the more I have seen, the more I've been
Mhm.
like, oh, that's not disgusting, or
Yeah.
that's not, I don't have the reaction I'm expecting to have. But at the same time, there is a part of me that eventually it will just switch over, like I said. But yeah, I guess I'm just like trying to figure out, how do I find an equilibrium? And, are there ways that I could process this and kind of like reset when this happens? So something else, this is what I was trying to think of. The more that I am able to be intimate and kind of keep that on a sort of semi-regular experience, the less likely I am to this sort of like the switch doesn't
Mhm.
happen as much. But then if there's been like a while, then it's almost like my body just like from the inside just like shuts down, and
Yeah.
it's like suddenly switches. So that's all I can say. I really don't know. I am
Yeah.
trying to be gracious and not force things, but I
And
also
I think that's
pushing
so
myself too much
valuable.
helps.
Sure. What I might suggest is that you really key in on that relationship with your body to the extent that feels comfortable for you, and find ways to be able to like stabilize your body when you have those kinds of reactions or before you have those kinds of reactions. If you're well clued into yourself and you notice that you're beginning to feel uncomfortable, are you able to soothe yourself? Do you have good coping skills? Things like yoga or meditation, even something like box breathing or these different grounding exercises. There are a lot of things that you can do to help soothe yourself when you have that type of reaction, which could be really valuable.
Mm.
uh, Tell me a little bit about what your healing journey has looked like. I mean, are you somebody who has found a lot of success by working with a therapist, or are there books that have been meaningful to you, or is this something that you've been kind of white knuckling on your own?
As far as the sexuality aspect of my mental health, I really have been white knuckling it on my own. I
Mm,
don't have the money for therapy right now.
sure.
I was just diagnosed with a personality disorder,
Mm,
and I'm doing everything I can to find worksheets and watching professionals, and I'm basically doing everything I can to try to, get help. And I'm still finding it, but no, not really with this. Um,
sure.
I really don't. You are the person I thought of. Not to put any pressure on you.
Yeah. Well, I definitely don't want to dismiss what you're saying in the least bit, but just as a word to you and to everybody else watching, there are more low cost or free therapy options than you might realize. And it's going to depend on where you are. I recognize that the offerings are limited. It is not a great system, particularly here in America, the way that we fund healthcare and mental health being like sort of the, table by the kitchen of the health sphere. There are a lot of barriers to access. And we've talked on this show a number of times about some ways to overcome that. And so I do want to encourage you to be curious and to see if there may be some options in your area. Very quickly, I'll mention openpathcollective.org. I believe it's yeah, I'll make sure to have that in the show notes for this episode, as well as some of our longer conversations on this topic. But taking for granted that finding a good sex positive therapist in your area being difficult, I might recommend a book like Leaving the Fold by Marlene Winnell as a way of like really looking at that relationship with Christianity and how you're healing in that way, as well as a lot of what you're doing, that sort of gentle stretch to normalize and acclimate yourself to these things. And if you can support yourself during that process, and instead of like pushing yourself harder and harder and harder, by showing yourself some kindness Recognizing that, all right, I'm going to watch some porn and that might be really fun, but it might also be dysregulating. And so beforehand or perhaps afterwards, I might want to take a bath. I might want to go for a walk, call a friend, spend a little bit of time singing. I mean, all of these things are things that we know can help stabilize our nervous system and help you regulate as that feeling of
Mhm.
terror starts to kick in. So it's going to be different for everybody. And I would definitely hope that you would have some support in all of this. But the most important thing you can be doing is supporting yourself by not dismissing those uncomfortable feelings and instead like working to tend to them and to show yourself some compassion.
Yeah. So do you think, like, how can I find out if this is my sexual identity that I kind of go through periods of time? Like, is that ever normal? Um, is that kind of a gray sexual type of experience, or is that just me being kind of in limbo right now and not being fully, healthy or comfortable as who I am? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wish that there was a blood test or something that we could offer you. And this is tricky space that often comes up around the aspect community because it can be difficult to differentiate between, who we would have been at birth if we hadn't
Mhm.
had the environment that we did. And that's really going to be true of
Yeah.
all of us on some level. So I would tell you that you may find a lot of community and a lot of support in the asexual community. We spoke to Miss O'Kist about some of the incredible asexual groups and community that can be found online. And I think you may find people who are familiar with your story that may be able to help guide you through their experiences. I would definitely say that me and nobody else is going to be able to come in and tell you whether this is asexuality or trauma. But on a certain level, I want to say that it doesn't matter. And when I say that, all I really mean to suggest is that regardless of what label you put on yourself, regardless of what your quote genetic potential might have been or what your experiences have been, you have the body that you have. It has the reaction or the experience to sex that it has. And potentially you can curate some other thoughts and feelings. And if you enjoy doing that, if it feels fulfilling and it feels like you can do so safely and maybe not comfortably, but in a way that isn't wrecking your life or overwhelming you, then great, do that. If you decide, you know what, like sex maybe isn't something I want to prioritize right now. This is too much work. This is too exhausting. I want to leave that be for now.
Mhm.
That's okay too. You don't owe it to anybody to have a fulfilling sex life, not even yourself. I would hope for that for you. But if it is ruining your life to try and find that for yourself, then what's the point of it anyway?
Well, I mean, it's, I am in a relationship
Sure.
with a wonderful person who is my life partner. And so it does, it's not something that I can or want to dismiss.
Hmm. Yeah.
It makes me very sad thinking that I might be asexual when I am in that place. It gives me a sense of dread, like, oh my goodness, what is this is my reality. This is not, I'm not okay with this. Not that it's bad, but for me, that's
Hmm.
not okay. And so I just am trying to figure out, okay, how do I handle potentially, like, assuming that maybe it is? I don't know if I should assume it's trauma, given that I don't feel satisfied thinking that I might be asexual. If I should approach it as, okay, let's just assume that this is trauma. Now, how can I treat the trauma? Or if I should try to go a different way. I don't know what that would be. So,
Yeah, well, without wanting to be prescriptive about it, I'm going to trust you to know yourself, to know your body, and to know what feels good for you more so than anybody else could possibly tell you. But I might suggest that it sounds like you've had a lot of traumatic experiences in the past, or I really shouldn't even say a lot. Much of what you're describing feels very familiar and is unique to you.
mm,
But recognizing that if you are asexual but are having sex or having sex that makes you feel uncomfortable, that feels like a form of trauma kind of in its own right. It sounds like a
Mm.
lot of what you're experiencing is going to have some of the hallmarks of pain and may require a little bit of healing. And so, regardless of who you are, quote unquote, I think that working with a therapist, working to soothe and become comfortable and more compassionate with your body is all going to work out regardless.
Hmm. And you'd say the same thing for just even just visual, like nudity, or reading comments that people have who are horny, or like all of that. That could also, I could process that in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, there are
I don't
the
want to feel so
asexual community is
isolated.
huge with a lot of different types of people in it. Many of them struggle with different forms of sex repulsion, but it's not a automatic piece of being asexual. And so, from a lot of what you're describing, I would imagine
Hmm.
trauma plays a part in all of this. But I
Yeah.
guess more than anything, I really wanna encourage you to enjoy your body as it is, to enjoy your life as it is, without feeling like you need to force one particular outcome. Your happiness, your health and wellness is the most important piece of all this.
Yeah, I guess that's surprisingly radical in my mind, but that's a good
I
note, and I
I
will
get it.
definitely take that to heart.
Sure. Well, and there will be a handful of resources in the show notes for this episode that might be useful for some of the things that we've been discussing. Let me encourage you to be curious, to check some of that stuff out, to find what feels good, but also remember that this is not an obligation, right? If it's not benefiting you, then who is it benefiting and why bother?
Hmm.
Mhm. We really
I guess that's
appreciate
to know.
you sharing your
And
experience
yeah.
with us. I know that all of this can be very challenging. We'd love to hear from you again as you kind of take another step in this journey. And if you get any clarity, please give us a call back.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, thank you so much.
Bye.
Mhm.